right. Well, welcome to the Stump, where I discuss a variety of forestry issues, career and personal development topics, and really anything else that's on my mind. I'm your host, Matt Comiskey. Today, Jim Petersen is joining us on the Stump. Jim is a co-founder of the nonprofit Evergreen Foundation and publisher of the Evergreen, the foundation's periodic journal. Welcome, Jim. I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, I have a long list of folks I'm looking forward to interviewing, and I will say that you have been at the top of that list. So I'm glad that the
Mhm.
stars have aligned and we've been able to get on here. But I thought just so that those who may not be familiar with you, kind of your history background, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and how you got here.
Sure. It's a long story. How much time do you have?
As long as you want, we can always split these
No,
into two,
no,
but I got to go pick up a cake later today. So it can't be, like 8 hours, but
all right. Well, yes, I always say that I'm the co-founder. I actually founded it, but I always have wanted to give credit to the small mill owners in Southern Oregon and Northern California who provided startup funding for us. But we started planning for this in the fall of 1985. So we've been at it now for 40 years. And it's been an interesting ride for sure. Lived through the spotted owl wars and all of that, and have had the good fortune to find ways to keep Evergreen financially solvent, and you know it's a it's a career that's taken me to every forested state in the United States, most recently New Jersey, um, and most provinces in Canada. And in fact, I even 1995, I think it was 95, I sold my home in Southern Oregon, bought a 42-foot Teton fifth wheeler and hit the road. And I traveled full time for 3 years because I wanted to see it all on the back roads, if you will, kind of in the style of Charles Corral, meet people, talk with them, learn everything that I possibly could. I don't have any forestry credentials, none. Everything I know, I learned from listening to other people who are way smarter than I am. But yeah, it's been really interesting. My background is in journalism and broadcasting. Um, I've been a working journalist now for 60 years.
oh wow. See, yeah, you learn everything doing these things. I had no idea you had no forestry background. I assumed that
Uh,
you were a forester, and that's how you kind of got into this gig. But
Everybody does assume that, and I'm frankly pleased that they do, but I've never claimed forestry credentials. It just, people read my stuff and think, golly, he must be. And well, no, actually, he isn't. But I I got started in an interesting way. I was asked to come to, at the time I was living in Lake Oswego, and an old friend of mine from Southern Oregon contacted me, a guy named Don Johnson, who at that time was timber manager for Rough and Ready Lumber Company at Cave Junction. Rough and Ready is gone now too, but um, he asked me if I could come down to Medford to talk to a meeting of the board of directors of the old Southern Oregon Timber Industries Association, also long gone. And I said, sure, what's the deal? And he said, well, he said, we're looking right straight into the throat of the first decadal forest plans. And he said, nobody has a clue what we ought to be doing. So I did a little nosing around and figured out what the plans were, just in a basic sense. And I went to this meeting. And it was like being at a funeral. These directors, all, they were beside themselves about what to do. Well, about 5 minutes before the meeting ended, the guy who was then president of the board turned to me and he said, "I'm very, very sorry." He said, "As you can see, there's a lot of concern here, and we haven't given you time to talk. Would you be willing to come back next month and talk with us?" I said, "Sure." So the following month, I tootled down to Medford again, and I spent about 45 minutes talking about what I would do if I were in their shoes. And a lot of nodding and everything, and they said that they would talk about it, and that was fine. And so I got up to leave, and there was a guy sitting over in the corner of the conference room. Actually, he was a director, but I didn't realize it at the time because he'd never said a word. And his name was Bob Slagle, R.B. Slagle, who was kind of the king of the log truckers in Southern Oregon, Northern California. He ran about 35 or 40 trucks. Anyway, he spoke up as I was actually on my way out the door, leaving the room, and he said, "Well, Sonny," he said, "that's a hell of an idea you've got there, but," he said, "there ain't a son of a bitch in the room that knows how to do it. Would you do it?" Over my shoulder, I said, "Yeah, sure." And that was it. I left. Well, never had actually, I did have a contract with them later on, but I just started in. And what we started in with was Evergreen Magazine. I knew that we needed some sort of a tool that we could use to factually tell our side of the story about what forest planning meant and about the need for communities impacted by these plans to get involved. The Forest Service wanted to hear from them. What do you think? What should we do? Very different than today. Well, I ended up reading, see, I think there were 7 national forests. Plans wait. You ever see a forest plan?
Oh yes,
Okay.
I've
Well,
got.
they came in boxes, and the box weighed about 14 pounds.
Yep.
And it would, I still have a couple of them here. They're very, very interesting to read because they were assembled by people who knew what the hell was going on. And we used Evergreen as a vehicle for conveying public comment to the Forest Service. And as an association, SODIA, Southern Oregon Timber Association, came down on the side of favoring every, what they call the recommended plans. I can't remember the phrase now, but the preferred alternative.
Oh yes. Yep.
We supported every preferred alternative except the one for the Rogue River National Forest. And the reason we didn't was because, for some strange reason, the Rogue River National Forest of that time chose to throw away all of its work notes. There was nothing. Here it is. Well, where's the document? Oh, we got rid of all that.
Oh my
So
goodness.
we ended up, with the help of the Chamber of Bedford, Rogue River, Jackson County Chamber of Commerce, they put together a team and basically wrote their own alternative and submitted it to the Forest Service. And lo and behold, they got most of what was in it. So, of course, again, very different from today. But one of the things we did, I think we were the first people to do it. We put checkoff cards in these issues of the magazine so that if somebody didn't have time or the ability to write a personal letter to the Forest Service, they could check off things they liked or didn't like. And the checkoff card had pretty much everything on it because we needed it to be credible, which meant if somebody said, I supported putting it all in the wilderness, we had a checkoff box for that. Well, we didn't realize it at the time. Bob Devlin, who was then the forest supervisor on the Umpqua, told me years later, he said, you guys the Forest Service had to read 1 million comment cards
Oh, wow.
generated by us. And I can't remember who the regional forester was at the time. It wasn't Jim Torrance. It was somebody up there decided, well, we're not going to accept comment cards anymore. People have to write us a letter. Well, Mark Hatfield got wind of that. He was then the senior senator from Oregon and a force to be reckoned with in the United States Senate. I was sitting beside him at a meeting in Roseburg, an evening meeting, and he was speaking, and I mentioned this whole thing to him, He said, what? I said, yeah, they're not going to do that anymore. And he turned to his aide, I can't remember what his name was now, but he said, get the Secretary of Agriculture on the phone for me. And he was serious. He didn't want to talk to anybody at the Forest Service. He called the Secretary of Agriculture and he said, you will accept checkoff cards. And whoever it was said, yes, sir, we will. And that was the end of it. But, it's all changed now, thanks to the spotted owl and that big long war of nastiness. And, I look at what's going on today and it's astonishing. You stop and think about this, what I call the federal forest estate, 193 million acres, and it's forest land and it's rangeland. And wildfire has, well, I say it this way, a little over half of that 193 million acres is dying, dead, or burnt to a crisp. How do you like it so far? Well, we have a lot of new friends. Most of them are in the recreation industries because, they've discovered that most people who recreate in national forests don't much care about black sticks. In fact, I had a fairly heavy behind the scenes involvement in the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. And when it came time to do the polling of focus group work to see exactly where we were in terms of that, I can't remember his name, Frank Luntz, a big pollster in Washington, D.C., works mainly for Republican causes, but not totally. Anyway, Luntz put together the focus group works and did the polling. And I was invited to be an observer, if you will, at several of these focus group sessions. And I remember the one in Memphis, Tennessee. Luntz chose Memphis, Tennessee, because of course it was Al Gore's home. And I think he actually wanted to shove a sharp stick in Al Gore's eye, but he never said anything like that. I mean, he's way too polite. Anyway, all these people that have been selected, I don't know what his selection process was, but like a dozen people. And they're all sitting around this big conference table and talking about national forests and what they all wanted. And they were shown photographs of dead trees and green trees and everything in between. And I took a lot of notes. And of all, I think I went to 4 different focus groups. And the notes were very consistent. There are 4 things that we'll call them ordinary people really want from their national forests: clean air, clean water, abundant fish and wildlife habitat, and a wealth of year-round outdoor recreation opportunity. These are not things that you find in black sticks. So we know what the public wants, and we know what the public is getting from the Forest Service, which has totally lost sight of its mission. We have 4 Forest Service retirees on our board of directors. These guys are all walking encyclopedias, and they're, with the exception of one, they're all men in their 80s, as you might imagine. And they come from the era in which we started Evergreen. And I learned a great deal from just visiting with these guys. And they're all very, very upset about what's happened. I mean, and some of them are so upset that what they say you really don't want to repeat. But it's, we live in interesting times, and it'll be very interesting to see what changes come about as Trump re-enters the White House in January. We hear all sorts of things, and I don't have any inside information. I watch it, I listen. You try to figure out just which way things are going. When he was president the first time, he was widely criticized for saying, well, we need to rake the forest. And I thought at the time that happened, and everybody had a big horse laugh on it, I thought, damn it, you've just missed a huge opportunity to bring the president of the United States to the West and show him what's happening and talk about it. The industry didn't see value in that. The industry, we talk about how screwed up the Forest Service is. What's left of the industry isn't exactly doing what I would call a good job. But hey, it's theirs to do with as they like, and that's that.
Yeah, I would echo that we sometimes might be our own worst enemy when it comes to grabbing opportunities to help educate folks and particularly decision makers. But
it's dumbfounding, Matt. It really is.
it is, I'm associated with the folks that run healthy forests, healthy communities, and between Evergreen and HFHC, I mean those are the 2 most proactive organizations that I see out there trying to,
Nick does a nice job.
He does.
It's I take you back a long way now, but what Nick provides is a digital clipping service 5 days a week. He mines all these different newspapers and newsletters and everything all across the country. And that's what he puts up on his website. And I remember when, if you really wanted to know what was going on in the world, you had to hire a clipping service. And they'd say, well, what kind of articles are you looking for? And you tell them, and they'd send them to you every day in the mail.
Yep.
No, you were perpetually behind, but none, it was still useful. Um, and I have, yeah, interesting times. But the idea, Nick's idea of an organization that works all across the country, coast to coast. And he didn't start there. He started in Western Oregon, but he's gradually built it out and he does a nice job. That idea actually came from a man named Joe McCracken. Uh, my mother and McCracken were both from Dillon, Montana, and she remembered him. He's younger than she. He's passed on years ago. In fact, he's buried in Dillon. Joe ran an organization called the Western Forest Industries Association, WFIA. And it was an organization that, like AFRC, mainly interests or maintains the interests of uh, public or of lumber companies that don't own land. They're dependent on the federal timber supply. And Joe saw the need for that, as did a man named Leonard Netzor that he worked with. Leonard was probably the best lawyer the industry ever had. Wonderful man. And Joe began to expand east. He got all the way into Montana before the guys, what I used to refer to fondly as the bad boys on Interstate 5, before they figured out what the hell he was doing. And they tried to fire him for doing it, because in their world, nobody else needed to exist. We'll take care of it, whatever it is. And every one of these guys on the west side then, and they're all together, but they secretly hate each other. That's probably a strong word, but they're competitors. And every one of them believes that their mill is the best mill there is. And at the end of the day, everybody else will perish and they'll be the last mill on the face of the earth. That's kind of an exaggeration, but you could see that thought process going on. Well, so they tried to fire McCracken. And Joe's lieutenant, I'll think of his name in a minute, he figured out what was going to happen. And he worked with a guy named Holly Larson. Holly was on WFIA's board, and he and his brothers had huge sawmilling and logging interests in northwest Montana. And Holly, they figured out that they could gather enough proxy votes to keep Joe on the payroll, and they did. And the guys that were on the west side were so angry about what they had done that they all left WFIA and they formed the Northwest Timber Association, which was based in Eugene. They were all trying to get the same things done, but they just couldn't stand each other anymore. They didn't trust each other. Most of what I know about it, I learned from an old friend of mine named Aaron Jones, who owned Seneca Sawmill in Eugene. And Aaron was the guy who kind of led the charge to start Northwest Timber. And it was only after quite a few years that he realized that, McCracken was right. So, the upshot is through all the associations and all the mergers that happened and everything, we're left with AFRC, which is exactly what you've described and what I have described, and they do a nice job. But these ideas have been around for quite a while.
Yeah, it is interesting how there's not maybe necessarily anything radically new, but there's maybe new ways of doing what we've been doing for a long time. But
Yes,
yeah, it is an interesting world that I don't know from where I sit. It is fascinating to watch a lot of these, particularly manufacturing companies that At the bidding table, the auction table, they will beat each other up and
Well,
fight to the death.
yeah,
But boy, you get us out in an environment where the arrows, the shots are coming in towards, just the industry as a whole, and they will circle the wagons and they will fight for each
yep,
other.
they will.
Um,
They very artfully found ways to check their guns and knives at the door and get done what needs to get done. Um, and it's much better than it was. It really is. I don't, as I said earlier, a lot depends on what happens over the next 4 years. Actually, probably the next two, because you're president for 4 years, but in the second year, Congress tries to get reelected, and the House, and things could change. We don't know. We really
yeah,
don't know.
I think the only thing that I've been seeing so far is I think that this time will be a much quicker pace of getting the new administration's infrastructure into place, unlike last time where we were what 2.5 years into some of those critical positions. But um so I was wondering, I was checking around your website, and you got a pretty broad variety of subjects. How do you decide what to write about and what to cover on there? Because I mean, obviously you've been leading the charge on the wildfire issue and all that, but there's a whole host of other topics from recreation to kind of capturing some of the history, and I'd say the characters of the industry over the years. So what kind of leads you to selecting your issues and your topics?
Well, you know, I'm a I'm a journalist. The topics sort of pick themselves. You AFRC is a very good place to start every day to kind of get a sense of what's happening. Um, and we we still have to make a living, no matter what the news is. And not every topic is a topic that will lead to money. So we identify projects that will attract funding, that keep us in business. I mentioned that I've been in every forested state, the last one being New Jersey. We have a huge project underway in New Jersey. Most people don't realize that there are actually forests in New Jersey. We think of it as just a big parking lot. Well, they actually have some very, very nice forests there. They have land that's very well managed, privately owned. They do a great job. They have land that belongs to the state. There's very little federal land in New Jersey. The Forest Service through its research arm, has a presence in New Jersey. But land in New Jersey is either owned by the state of New Jersey or private landowners. And the state of New Jersey has had a terrible time figuring out how to manage its lands. Where have you heard this story before? And only recently have they come to realize that preservation doesn't work. The only way to conserve forests, to save forests, if you will, is to conserve them, which is to manage them. 4 years ago, I met a forester. I was at a conference in Dallas, Texas, and I met this guy from New Jersey. His name is Bob Williams. Bob Williams turns out to be one of the brightest foresters, most inspiring guys I've ever been around. My wife and I were with him in New Jersey in October. And for 10 days, we drove around in Bob's pickup. And he showed us what's going on, what he does, what the state doesn't do. I had the opportunity to personally interview close to 30 people. And it was very, very interesting to see the story that we are living here in the West they've been living in New Jersey since the 1600s. Really an interesting story. We'll, in about a month, we'll publish an issue of our magazine, 40 pages. It's a beautiful issue that explains the New Jersey story, what's happened, how it happened, the history, what's still going on. You know, there aren't any sawmills in New Jersey as you and I would recognize a sawmill. But they have in the Pine Barrens where they're called pineys. I don't know where the name came from, except that they live there and work there. And most of the wood they process um, is actually Atlantic white cedar, which is a lot like Western red cedar chemically and mechanically, but it's a different tree. Grows only in the east, mostly along the Atlantic seaboard. Um, Pineys have their own mills, and they're by and large one-man mills.
Okay.
And the mills would have a footprint, if you will, that's probably that of a three-bedroom house. And you can't buy a mill out of a box. I mean, you can get wood misers and things like that to start out, but most of these guys have mills that they've assembled themselves over the years um, with parts they buy at auctions. Most of these mills are powered by old farm tractor engines. And these guys cut pine and they cut Atlantic white cedar. Interestingly, most of the Atlantic white cedar uh, is sold to organizations or to families that own homes that are on the National Historic Register. A lot of Atlantic white cedar ends up in Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm
Oh,
sure some of your
hmm.
listeners have been to Williamsburg. Williamsburg dates from the early 1700s. And it was actually put back together, by the Rockefeller Foundation. And they have their own nonprofit there, and their purpose is to uh, restore and repair historic buildings or homes. They buy a lot of Atlantic white cedar from Virginia or from New Jersey to do this. And it's what,
Fascinating. Yeah,
yeah,
I've actually got a lot of family in New Jersey. That's why I always chuckle when people I run into, they think of New Jersey as, like Newark and, all the massive, kind of more urban area of the north versus the south, where, a lot of my family's farmers and
yep,
that kind of stuff. And yeah, and I know Bob. I've not had the pleasure of meeting him in person yet, but I'm hoping one of my trips back to New Jersey, I'll get the chance to swing in and say hello to him and learn a little bit more about forestry back in that state.
he's a wonderful guy and a very, very gracious host. We've really enjoyed him over the years that we've known him. Anyway, out of the meetings that I attended in Dallas, he asked me if I would be willing to come and help him tell the story of forestry in New Jersey, and that's how we got started. So
Yeah.
we are, and our only other project at the moment is in Northwest Montana. Um, we are working with Bruce Vincent and his son Chas, who has restarted Vincent Logging. And Chas works only for the Hecla Mining Company. They own a lot of forest land in Northwest Montana. And uh, we are attempting to figure out how to increase the grizzly bear population in Northwest Montana, while at the same time keeping grizzlies out of your garbage can. So we, with the help of a forester from the Idaho Forest Group up in Moyer Springs, we have, we're doing thinning work on Hecla ground. And we've enlisted the help of a man named Chad Oliver. If you remember Chad from,
I was a student of Chad's at the University of Washington.
okay, well, you know the story then. And Chad lives in South Carolina now, and he's still fairly active. And he's been up here with us twice and helping Chas figure out how to do this using stand dynamics techniques that are very much oriented toward conservation and growth and forest health. And he's been a huge help. We have assembled a team of partners, including the Forest Service, the National Fish and Wildlife Service, Montana DNR, the Forest Service's research lab in Missoula, a lot of groups, the tribe, the Kootenai tribe, they've all come to the table with the same idea in mind, which is how do we do this? And so far, so good. We're only 4 years in now, I think, but um, the idea is to create travel corridors for the bears. Those corridors become places where food grows for bears because you're doing the thinning work that gets the sunlight in for the first time in a long time. And you are growing food for the bears while guiding them around the towns. As you know, they people don't like bears, and so when you tell them that what you hope to do is uh, bring more bears, they get a little uppity until you explain that the real purpose here is to, we're trying to create a situation here in which it will become possible to manage the Kootenai National Forest again, while at the same time guiding the bears on travel routes that take them around places like Libya and Troy, Montana. So far, so good. We'll see. That anyway, that's the other thing we're involved in. That's it right now. We're just, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next year.
Yeah, so beyond these two projects, what does the future hold for Evergreen?
Well, that's an interesting question. I really don't know the answer because I'll be 81 in February, and I really am not going to do this forever. I could tip over dead. But and some people wish I would, but I we'll be fine. I don't want Evergreen to just die when I die. I don't want that to happen. So we have to find ways to keep ourselves funded and to continue to do work. I've always felt that what works is to keep pushing out, not to be insular. You have to pick people and projects that allow you to reach a wider audience, as you know from your work. And the whole purpose of this is to increase public support, public understanding and support for science-based forestry. We can't save this by preserving it. We can only save it, if you will, by managing it. For a lot of people, management is bad. They think if you cut trees, you must be evil. Well, if nothing else, the New Jersey project proves that that's not true. If New Jersey wants to have forests, it can't lock them up. And any more than you can lock up forests in the West.
I you, I think you're right. I actually kind of feel that the broader public out there, I think, understands that. And sometimes it's the very loud minority that my personal belief is they're scared of change. And active forest management is change, which, of course, I mean, these are dynamic systems that are going to change whether we're here or not.
That's exactly
Um,
right.
but yeah, I think you're right. I think most of the general public, at least a lot of folks I run into, when you explain the science, the process, and all of that behind it, most people seem to be okay with it, but it's the getting that message out. And so if I'm not asking any trade secrets or anything, a succession plan or anything, because I know, I mean, Evergreen is synonymous with Jim Petersen. Jim Petersen is synonymous with Evergreen, and I know when I look around, I don't see a lot of people coming into the journalism field, and especially those interested in kind of telling the stories
Mhm.
that you tell. I mean, I I actually have a rough time finding journalists. Most of them I refer to as authors, and every once in a while, when I actually find a journalist that I talk to, I celebrate them, even if they maybe are writing a story and investigating from a perspective that might not be as favorable to the industry. But um, so, I mean, is that kind of
Well, you're right, Matt. There are a lot of young people who are interested in this, and frankly, one of the reasons is that it doesn't pay very well, you know, and young people need to work, um, and there are other ways for them to make livings that are pretty lucrative, and so yeah, you hope to find young people who come from the kind of families uh, where they get it, we'll say. And there are some young people out there I see that, that have potential. You just have to show them a way to make a living doing it. And I think especially with all the interest today among young people in, the outdoor world, the environment, I think that's great. You know, time was when that idea didn't sell very well in the industry, but that's why the industry is kind of in a box right now. They didn't pay attention, and a lot of young people don't hold them in very high regard, but they still use the products and services. And so you just you keep looking. I can see some kids out there. My Our youngest daughter is a case in point. She's very interested in what goes on in forests. A lot of interest in recreation and hiking and skiing. And she's 25, and yeah, Sophie's been a ballet dancer since she was 4 years old. So you wouldn't think a kid who's, you know, and in fact, she teaches dance in Missoula, but she has all these other interests, and she's been around the world several times, worked in Africa and villages, for an organization called Give that's it's a smaller privately funded version of the Peace Corps. And so she spent a lot of time in communities and small towns and um, Tanzania primarily, uh, building infrastructure and working with farmers and a lot of that stuff. And then we have a son who actually works in cybersecurity in the banking industry, but he's a computer whiz. He's a graduate of the Oregon Institute of Technology, and he works with us periodically on technology issues, which is very valuable to us because the whole world is based on technology now. And I, with help from my wife, I could be on the program this morning because I don't, it's not my forte, if you will. I appreciate it a lot. I understand, I mean, we live in a technological world, and people ask why we don't print a magazine monthly anymore. Well, it's simple. It's cost. And the internet, the World Wide Web, if you will, moves at the speed of light, and it's free. You don't have to be a financial wizard to figure out that you ought to be using that. And so we've built this huge website. The guy that built our website is actually my brother-in-law, and he did a real deep dive into the forestry world globally. And he called me and he said, "Do you realize you have more content on your website than any other forestry related website on earth?" And I said, "No, I didn't, but we've been at it for 40 years, so I guess it makes sense that we'd have more content than anybody else." And we have readers, people who read our website, from all over the world. And he said, "Well, content is king, keep it up."
Oh
So,
yeah, no, it definitely is, and and that cost aspect. Before we hit record here, we were chatting about old Finley Hayes, the founder of Loggers World, and I am still amazed that that publication is still printed, and sent out. Though nowadays it's a combination Loggers World, Truckers World, but
yeah.
it's still pretty amazing to see in this day and age that there's still newspaper print type media out there that's still getting out and around.
And I enjoy it every issue I read from cover to cover. The other thing that you talking about young people. Well, what you see in Lover's World are the grandsons, great grandsons, granddaughters of loggers, and they're running these companies now. These are youngsters in their 20s and 30s. So yeah, I think in terms of logging, you know, at least on the west side, there's hope. We're involved through the University of Idaho, which is only about 90 miles south of us. And uh, what's his name? The guy from Oregon that came up with the training program.
Blake, or
Blake
there's
Manley.
Blake
Manley.
Manley, and then there's also Ryan Becker, I think, does stuff at Idaho. So
Manley has been over here several times. He's a very impressive young man. A lot of enthusiasm, and it's all oriented toward how do we train, how do we attract young people at junior high age, get them
yes,
interested. When Bruce Vinton and I were still traveling a lot, uh, and John Deere was still around. Um, they had and it was another company with a Canadian company that Deere bought. Oh, I can't remember now. Anyway, they had a harvest simulator, and we were in Washington D.C. for some show and tell stuff we were doing, working at some schools in Washington D.C. and New York, and we talked him into bringing the simulator down to where we were in D.C. We were set up in a school auditorium, and you give these kids a chance to, just run one of these machines. And of course, there's a printout right there that shows you in the screen, and you can see how you're doing it, with joysticks in a machine. It was really interesting. And this one young man, from the Black Ghetto, and he sat down and he got 100 and did so fairly quickly because these kids are used to joysticks.
mm-hmm.
And he was kind of amazed. And I looked at the guy he was with Deere, and he was kind of looking at him. This kid turned, he said, "Can I get a job doing this? Do you want to start today?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are reasons for hope. Probably the greatest unfilled area is the one we've been talking about, which is young people that have communication skills that want to be involved in helping tell the story. That's still a tough one because, a lot of people that are in these mills think that what we're trying to do is a waste of what one guy said to me straight to my face. He said, "This is a waste of time, talent, and treasure." I said, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, I definitely agree with you though. If we're not out there telling our story, who is telling our story? And so we need to be out there and helping recruit the next generation of storytellers.
Yep, absolutely.
So, well, hey, I don't want to keep you all day. I could sit and chat all day long, but
I mean,
how should any of the listeners learn more about Evergreen? I think you're on kind of most of the popular social media platforms. Of course, there's evergreenmagazine.org. We'll put all this stuff in the show notes, but how do they learn more? And is there anything else you want to add?
I don't know what it'd be. Our website speaks for itself, and it's easy to contact me through that. Jim at evergreenmagazine.com. My wife is Julia at evergreen.com. We're both around, and she's the social media maven, and she's really good at it. So we're here, a phone call away or an email away. Not hard to reach us. Um, Good to talk to you, Matt.
Yes,
Take care
been
of
great.
yourself. And if you need any help, why, give me a shout.
I will certainly do that. And next time I'm over in the Coeur d'Alene area, I'll look you up.
Oh, please do.
Sounds
Uh,
great. Thank you, Jim.
you're very welcome. Thank you.